Thank you for joining me once again on The Things That Bother Me. This doesn't stay rural. If you've been following this series, you already know where we've been. Episode 1, There Aren't Enough Jobs to Mandate. Episode 2, When the Safety Net Disappears, Fragile Systems Don't Adjust, They Strain. Now we widen the lens, because there's a reaction out there that needs to be addressed. It doesn't affect me. They deserve it. Just move. Let them deal with it. That mindset might feel satisfying. It's also deeply uninformed. Rural America is not an isolated experiment. It's not a sealed container where collapse can happen quietly without consequence. It's part of a national economic system. Healthcare networks are connected. Supply chains are connected. Migration patterns are connected. Labor markets are connected. You cannot hollow out part of a country and expect the rest to remain untouched. And today, we're going to talk about why that assumption is not just wrong, it's reckless. This is episode 3. This is about spillover. This is about feedback loops. This is about what happens when people think collapse can be contained. Let's get into it. Episode 3, This Does Not Stay Rural. Let's address something that's been floating around in comment sections and social media threads. They voted for it. They deserve it. Let it burn. Just move to where the jobs are. Doesn't affect me. That reaction might feel satisfying to some people. It also reveals a staggering misunderstanding of how this country actually works. Because here's the truth. Rural America is not a sealed-off island. It is not an isolated experiment. It is not a self-contained political punishment zone. It is part of a national system, and systems do not operate in isolation. If your response to structural destabilization is to laugh, cheer, or shrug, you're not demonstrating intelligence. You're demonstrating that you don't understand networked economies. Destabilization doesn't care about county lines. It doesn't care about voting patterns. It doesn't care who was cheering. It spreads. And today we're going to talk about why. Section 1. The illusion of containment. There's this fantasy that collapse can be geographically contained, as if rural counties are pressure chambers that can fail quietly without affecting anyone else. That's not how supply chains work. Rural regions anchor agriculture, energy production, raw material extraction, distribution corridors, transportation routes. Food doesn't originate in high-rise apartments. Energy doesn't originate in coffee shops. When rural economies destabilize, the base layer of the system weakens. You don't remove support from the foundation of a structure and expect the upper floors to remain stable. That's not ideology. That's engineering. Believing otherwise isn't toughness, it's ignorance. Section 2, Hospital Closures and Urban Spillover. Let's talk about healthcare. When a rural hospital closes, patients don't disappear. They travel. They move into urban ER systems. They increase wait times. They increase strain. They increase costs. Healthcare is a network. If you remove nodes from that network, pressure redistributes. Urban hospitals already operate near capacity. When rural capacity collapses, overflow isn't theoretical. It's measurable. If you think rural closures don't affect cities, you don't understand capacity management. And if you don't understand capacity management, you shouldn't be mocking collapse. Section 3, Migration isn't optional. When local economies shrink and safety nets contract, people don't sit still. They move. And when they move, they don't arrive with surplus capital. They arrive under stress. Housing markets feel it. Rental supply tightens. Entry-level job competition increases. Public systems absorb new demand. If you think telling people to just move solves the problem, you haven't thought through what that actually means. Mass relocation under economic stress destabilizes receiving areas too. You don't fix fragility by redistributing it. Section 4, the they deserve it crowd. Now let's address the cruelest version of the argument. They deserve it. That statement says more about the speaker than the subject. If you think economic destabilization is an appropriate punishment for political disagreement, you are not analyzing policy. You are indulging resentment. And resentment is not a governing philosophy. It's emotional gratification. But here's what's dangerous about that mindset. It assumes collapse can be targeted. It assumes pain can be selectively applied. It assumes systems obey tribal lines. They do not. You cannot hollow out infrastructure in one region and expect the rest of the country to remain insulated. That's not how economies work. That's not how migration works. That's not how healthcare networks work. And that's not how national stability works. Section 5, Economic Illiteracy Masquerading as Confidence. There's a tone in some of these conversations that sounds confident, dismissive, almost amused. But confidence without structural literacy is just noise. If you don't understand supply chain interdependence, regional healthcare load balancing, migration dynamics, rural to urban economic feedback loops, then your confidence is built on assumption, not knowledge. And policy shaped by assumption creates consequences. Mocking collapse does not prevent it from reaching you. It just delays your awareness. Section 6, Destabilization is a feedback loop. Here's how it actually works. Assistance tightens, local spending contracts, businesses shrink, employment declines, migration increases, receiving regions strain, public systems absorb demand, costs rise, pressure increases. That's a feedback loop. And feedback loops do not stop because someone thought the collapse was deserved. They escalate until something stabilizes them, or until something breaks. In closing, let's be clear. You don't have to like rural America. You don't have to agree with how people vote. You don't have to sympathize politically. But if you believe destabilizing entire regions strengthens the country, you fundamentally misunderstand how systems operate. If you believe collapse stays contained, you fundamentally misunderstand networked economies. If you believe suffering can be selectively applied without blowback, you fundamentally misunderstand history. This isn't about feelings. It's about structure. You cannot remove healthcare capacity in one region and expect emergency systems elsewhere to remain untouched. You cannot collapse grocery access in one region and expect supply chains to remain frictionless. You cannot shrink safety nets in fragile areas and expect migration pressure not to increase. And you cannot cheer destabilization without eventually sharing in its consequences. Destabilization does not ask who voted for what. It does not ask who mocked whom. It moves. It redistributes. It amplifies. And by the time people who felt insulated realize what's happening, the strain has already spread. This does not stay rural. It never has. The only question is whether people are willing to understand that before the feedback loop tightens, because systems don't collapse all at once. They erode. Then they shift. Then they crack. And when they do, it won't matter who thought it was funny. It will matter who understood how it worked. The math doesn't care who you're mad at. Let's correct something. Not every rural voter voted for Trump. Not every rural county votes the same. Not every small town is politically uniform. Not every family pulled the same lever. Rural America is not a hive mind. And even if every rural voter aligned behind one candidate, they still could not win a presidential election alone. Rural communities do not have the population mass to carry the electoral college by themselves. National elections are coalitions. Urban voters matter. Suburban voters matter. Rural voters matter. No single block controls the machine. So when someone says, give them what they voted for, who exactly are you punishing? The rural Democrat, the independent, the nurse, the elderly patient, the child in a county with one hospital. Infrastructure doesn't check voter registration before it fails. And here's where the bill arrives. When rural hospitals close, patients don't disappear. They travel. They arrive uninsured, underinsured, sicker. Urban emergency rooms absorb them. Hospitals absorb uncompensated care. And hospitals don't just eat losses. They redistribute them. Higher uncompensated care equals higher negotiated equals reimbursement rates equals higher insurance premiums. Urban families pay more. Emergency room wait times increase. Trauma centers strain. Ambulances divert. Staff burn out. Collapse doesn't punish selectively. It redistributes pressure. Now let's talk about SNAP. When people lose food assistance, grocery demand contracts. Local stores sell less volume. Lower volume means higher per unit operating costs. Higher per unit costs mean higher shelf prices. And here's the part people ignore. Those higher prices don't just hit the former SNAP recipient. They hit everyone shopping in that store. In an economy where food is already expensive, where families already feel squeezed at checkout, destabilizing SNAP pushes prices higher for the same groceries. Because grocery margins are thin, distribution costs are fixed, volume loss gets priced back into the shelf. You don't punish one shopper, you increase costs across the aisle. Reduced SNAP spending also pulls federal dollars out of local economies. That means less spending at grocery stores, gas stations, pharmacies. That contraction ripples outward. When safety nets shrink, families relocate. Rental markets tighten. Entry-level job competition increases. Public systems absorb new demand. Cities don't grow their own food. They don't generate their own energy. They don't operate without freight corridors anchored in rural regions. Destabilize the base layer long enough and the strain moves upstream. You can cheer collapse, but you don't get to choose where it stops. That's episode 3. If you were hoping collapse could be quarantined to counties you don't like, it can't. If you thought rural instability doesn't affect cities, it does. If you thought healthcare closures, grocery shutdowns, and migration pressure just stay out there, they don't. This isn't tribal, it's structural. You can mock people, you can argue politics, you can cheer cuts, but you cannot hollow out part of a national system and expect the rest to operate normally. That's not how networks function, and pretending otherwise doesn't make you tough. It makes you uninformed. Episode 4 is where we pull the final thread. Because once you understand the labor scarcity, once you understand the disappearing safety net, once you understand that destabilization spreads, you're left with one unavoidable question. If this isn't fixing work, if this isn't strengthening infrastructure, then what is it actually about? That's next. If you want the full picture, not the surface-level talking points, make sure you're subscribed to The Things That Bother Me. Like it, comment. Share it with someone who still thinks this collapse is isolated. Episode 4 is the conclusion, and it's going to be uncomfortable. This is The Things That Bother Me. Until next time.